Hello, I am District 6 City Council member Maggie Ballard. With me here is Director of City County Planning Department, Scott Wadle. Thank you for
Hello.
being here with me today.
You bet. Glad to be here. Today we're talking about the Keep Clean building in Old Town. Is that right?
That is correct.
Awesome.
I've gotten some residents reaching out asking about an item wherein the council approved a request for Evergy to make renovations to the Keep Clean building in downtown Wichita. As background, in 2007, the Keep Clean building at 800 East 3rd Street was listed on the Register of Historic Kansas Places and the National Register of Historic Places. Evergy submitted an application to partially demolish part of the Keep Clean building, retaining the eastern exterior facade, and full demolition of the building to the north at 433 North Rock Island Avenue. Members of the Historic Preservation Board expressed concern that the Evergy substation expansion would demolish significant portions of the Keep Clean building. There were some concerns expressed by the Historic Preservation Board about the proposed demolition. Scott, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. Hey, great lead up to this one. So in terms of the Historic Preservation Board, because it was the Keep Clean building, because it's state listed and it's nationally listed, the purview of the Historic Preservation Board, per state statute and Wichita Municipal Code, is that they look at it and they say, will the proposed action have a detrimental effect to the listed property? So they don't really have a lot of leeway on this. And in this case, it was a demolition permit that was requested. And the whole triggering mechanism is that if the city of Wichita is going to take an action, and in this instance, the action was issuing a demolition permit that would have a detrimental effect to a listed structure, then it's got to go through the Historic Preservation Board. So that was a process that kicked it off. They went through their review. Of course, a demolition is going to have an adverse impact to a listed property. So they really didn't have a lot of leeway from the outset, just because it is a demolition and because there would be demolition taking place, it was going to have an adverse impact. And so that was their finding. Now, after that determination by the Historic Preservation Board, the applicant always has the opportunity to appeal to the City Council. Mm-hmm. And in that case, that's what Evergy did with that one. Now, a couple of things that I guess I should probably note as part of that process is that there was a staff presentation that took place at the Historic Preservation Board. There were opportunities for public comment. And then likewise, there was also a presentation that took place at City Council and additional opportunities for public comment at the City Council meeting. So it was an opportunity to hear different perspectives from a variety of folks, including the applicant on that one. And one thing that I think is kind of interesting about the process is that also they get feedback from the Historic Preservation Board members and from the dialogue of the community overall, and then Evergy gets an opportunity to kind of consider, are there any alternatives? And in this case, I don't believe they really found that. I think they determined that the other alternatives that they looked at really weren't feasible.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I believe it was April of 2022. I asked for a community meeting when we learned that this project was going to be coming up within the neighborhoods in general, and we asked them to look for alternate routes or ideas, and they came back to us with the substation expansion. Mm-hmm. So I think it was interesting, and I'm very appreciative that they looked for different routes because of the historic parts of Midtown and Riverside that this will be going through as well.
And for that routing, they were talking about routing the power lines through the neighborhoods. Now, what kind of poles were they talking about having to use on those?
So they were talking about the big steel poles on the concrete base at the turn corners.
Okay.
But being that they are able to expand the substation, it will eliminate a lot of those steel structures through Midtown and Riverside. So while we're just talking about the demolition of part of the Keep Clean building, the ripple effect of the project really, it's much more than just the building, because it allows other things to happen through the neighborhoods, like eliminating some of the steel poles, which I think is extremely important in taking the distribution off the top, so the poles won't be as tall. It's potentially interesting that they would be able to eliminate some of those other things that not expanding the substation wouldn't allow those.
So it sounds like this project really will have kind of a ripple effect through the community.
Mm-hmm.
And if this project, if I understand it correctly, if this expansion doesn't occur, Evergy said that the alternative is to run to increase kind of the power poles for the power lines running through the neighborhoods. Is that right? Is that a good description?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those went through historic neighborhoods. Is that right?
Correct. Midtown, and then it would be going through a part of Riverside, and then down through Riverside Park, all the way down Bidding. So with the expansion, it also would allow one of the mini substations off of Pine, I think, in Santa Fe. It will eliminate that completely.
Oh, wow.
That whole substation. So, nobody loves old historic buildings more than I do, but I think this was a good compromise to save the majority of the oldest part of the building, because they are going to keep the facade as well and tie in a solid gate wall, yes, around it, which I think is awesome, and that's not something that they were considering. They were looking at a chain link fence. So I feel like we really brought some concerns to them, being Evergy, through this process and for this project, and they really have answered some of the concerns and are willing to comply with some of our requests.
So it sounds like this project really kind of came forth out of an ongoing community dialogue that the community's been having with Evergy about power distribution and power lines in the entire community. Do you think that's a fair description?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, there were some mistakes made in District 1 with the power poles, and I think everybody wants to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And so we've been in close contact and lots of conversation about it being a give-take and making compromises. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. I wish that we didn't have to have any of the building torn down, but I think it was a good compromise to kind of stay neutral and stay out of some of the neighborhoods and expand the service, because of course we all need reliable electricity.
And I think one point that you brought up, which I think is so interesting, is that for the Keep Clean building, they're going to keep the oldest part, kind of that campus. It sounds like it kind of grew up over time, and there's kind of cinder block buildings and there's brick buildings. So they're going to keep the most important historic portion of it. Now to the north, there's a series of garage doors, and it sounded like they were going to retain that facade as well, right? And so by retaining that facade, then that's going to tie into kind of that new wall, screening wall that they're going to build around it. So from the outside, it sounds like the appearance really shouldn't change that much of the Keep Clean building. But on the interior, that will give them some much needed space, it sounded like, from Evergy to be able to add in their equipment and what they need.
And another thing that I appreciated is the Historic Preservation Board had expressed some concern about keeping some of the original portions of the building on the inside. So they'll be keeping the original safe, the terrazzo floor, and some of the windows and some of the other interesting older parts of the Keep Clean building that make it interesting and unusual and historical, for that matter. So I appreciated that they weren't going to be destroying those; they were going to be leaving those within the building to keep it intact.
And I think that story actually says a lot about the process, because by going through the Historic Preservation Board, by the board members highlighting some of the internal features that are really unique to Wichita and really the history of Wichita, I think that by going through that process, having that come up in the conversation, and then having the applicant, Evergy in this case, say, you know what, we will retain the building, we'll keep those features around. I think that really speaks volumes to the process in terms of community input and dialogue about this project. So,
I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on the open lot to the east. I've had lots of questions about why couldn't they just move to the open lot?
Yeah, great questions. This is something that Evergy discussed at the Historic Preservation Board and also at the City Council. And there's a few reasons they indicated why that wasn't really feasible. One of them is that there are utilities in the ground, both along Meade and along Rock Island that tie into the substation. And so if they were going to move the location of the open lot, they indicated that that would be a substantial hurdle to have to get over. The second one is that they indicated that they're under private ownership. The city doesn't own either the vacant lot with kind of the grass and trees on it or the parking lot. Those are both owned by private entities. And so they would have to have, in this case, a willing seller, or it would become extremely difficult. And then the third thing that they indicated was that the parking lot, and the southern portion of that one, the parking lot as a whole, it's under private ownership, but it also satisfies the off-street parking requirement for a property in the area, at least one property, maybe more. So if they were to acquire that, then that one property owner or property owners would no longer be able to meet that need and would be in violation of the zoning code. So it's kind of a tricky situation, and those were the justifications and reasons why they said that really isn't going to work out for us.
Okay. Is there any other things that you would like to share about this project?
Great question. I think we've talked about the process and highlighted, how that went through and opportunities for community input. So I think that that's really important for folks to understand about the process. I think the second thing is in terms of the structures and what will be retained and what it will look like from the exterior, it is important. We've had a great opportunity to chat about that and the implications for the Keep Clean building. And then in terms of alternatives, talking about the power lines and the possibility of those with really large metal poles going through historic neighborhoods versus expanding their campus at this location in Old Town has been a really good discussion. So I think we've covered most of the things that come to my mind in terms of what people have asked questions about in the past.
Okay. Well, in closing, I almost always am on the side of historic preservation, but in this case, balancing the needs of the neighborhood and region and minimizing the impact to the neighborhood. This solution is the best for preserving the dignity of Riverside and serving the most people. While we don't usually like to go against the recommendations of the Historic Preservation Board, this was a case that the council agreed unanimously was the best solution for our city. I want to thank everyone who has reached out about this issue and engaged. Hopefully this has answered some of the questions and concerns I've been hearing, but I welcome anyone to reach out to me if you have further concerns.